just to put it. So we are going to use this time for the October 28th Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council. And our agenda today is to talk about the upcoming council meeting agenda, where the cross-sector mitigation recommendations will be presented, the prioritized recommendations. We're going to also get a presentation from EFG and CADMIS regarding the modeling refinements that they have made. And I think they will be making a similar presentation to the council. We have time for public comment in a couple of different places. Then we've also invited Kaya Morris to join us again today, so that if you have any lingering questions regarding the equity screening that you have been going through to get ready for your final recommendations, that she can be there to answer those. And finally, we're going to talk about your draft and where where your drafts are, and just highlight any changes that you might have made to your draft since we last talked about them last week, I guess. And specifically any language you might have added to frame up your sections, so that we can give the rest of the subcommittee a chance just to respond to that. And then you have, I sent out, put together with Megan's help, a list that kind of summarizes all of the cross-sector mitigation recommendations, priority recommendations. And we're going to talk about that because we're going to try to use that as a survey tool with the council before the meetings, just to kind of test their where they are in terms of the topics that they most want to spend their time on, so that we're not taking that meeting covering all the items, but really focusing in on the ones that they have concerns about. I want to make sure that the way that the list has characterized your recommendations is good with you. So we'll spend a little time on that. Any changes to the agenda? Nope. All right, we're good to go on that. And then I think the next item is approval of the 10/21 cross-sector mitigation meeting minutes, which were linked in your agenda. Has everybody had a chance to review those, and anybody have any changes or edits you'd like to make to them? All right. All right, looks like we're good on that too.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. So Jane, who just got up, is next on our agenda. Jane, there she is. So the first item is just to talk about the council agenda and how that's going to proceed for this presentations.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon at this point. I dropped the agenda for our Tuesday's council meeting in the chat. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, I encourage you. We're going to try to do things differently than we have in the past with the council as the subcommittees bring up their information. At this point, there aren't really new actions that haven't been presented to the council in substantive ways yet. Most of the work over the course of the last few weeks since you last presented to them has really been about refining and bringing clarity to the work, as well as the work to complement your work with EFG and CADMIS's support. And so in a meeting we had earlier this week with Peter to sort of frame up how this might go, we built the council agenda based on that conversation and are proposing that Rich and Peter will present together the package of all of the work from cross-sector in just roughly a half an hour. And that will be focused specifically as an overview of all of the work from the sectors. I think it's important at this point for the work to be presented as a subcommittee, not broken out by task leads. And so Peter and Richard will do that to the best of their ability, working really off of the action list that we'll review at the end today with Catherine. And state staff are helping Peter. I think Catherine is too, actually, I should say, will translate that action list into a PowerPoint presentation for Peter and Richard to use on Tuesday based on the feedback and conversation that we have today. As Catherine alluded to, we'll also, as we post your work tomorrow, you've probably seen in my email, I gave a heads up to the council that as the work gets posted, I'll also be drawing their attention to a survey, asking them to highlight the components of your work that they'd like to focus on for various reasons, so that we can let you all know as task leads and subcommittee members what to prepare for Tuesday in order to have a robust conversation around issues that are percolating up to the council that might not allow the council to support the work of cross-sector via consensus right out of the gate. So hopefully we'll be able to identify those. And you'll notice on the council agenda that we've saved the majority of time at the end for an hour and a half conversation to dive into those issues and really try to work to resolve them as we approach December 1st. There's only one other sort of free-form council meeting on November 16th where issues that aren't resolved will sort of get taken up. So we want to do our best to work between now and then through personal connections and then through the work of the survey and other things to resolve as many things as possible. I will say then also preparing for the conversation today with EFG and Cadmus. EFG and Cadmus are going to present more detailed presentation to you all today, and I am asking all of you to, as you hear that, to be thinking about how they take that presentation down to like half of what they're going to talk through with you today, and what are the sort of salient points and overarching themes that we want EFG and Cadmus to be making with the modeling on Tuesday to support and lift up the actions that you're bringing to the council. Because as I just said, I really think the key is to dive into the substantive conversation, and the work of EFG and Cadmus is super important to support that. But I don't think we need to get into the level of detail that we'll go into today with you all. So we'll want to be listening to them and thinking about how we refine it and cut it back and what the key points are for the council. So that's the agenda. I'll pause for questions and look to you, Joey, to kick it off.
Thanks, Jane. So my question is, can you just remind me the timing of, so when you send this out and if people have questions or comments or concerns, when you would ask folks to share those concerns, and can the task leads, if it relates to one of the things that we're putting forward, be CC'd on those so that we can just see directly and hear directly from folks? I've been inviting folks to reach out.
Yeah.
I think Gina and I have the entire time, and I've responded to a couple of direct concerns and questions, and I'm happy to do that. So I just, to the degree that, you know, we have the time and the direct connection to have be able to respond, you know, as directly as possible would be great.
100%. I don't anticipate that myself or Peter and Richard will be the ones responding. My intent is to roll up the overall themes from the survey with Catherine and share it with the whole subcommittee, I imagine, on Monday. We haven't actually talked, Catherine, about what we're going to ask for the timeline, but I imagine since these aren't going to get posted till tomorrow, I imagine we'll give counselors till midday on Monday to respond, knowing that it's the weekend, and we'll give them Monday morning and ask that the survey be answered by noon on Monday is what I had been thinking, and then roll up that feedback and send it to the subcommittee as a whole so that task leads themselves are prepared to respond to the specific questions and issues that are percolating up. Go ahead, Gina.
There I go, I unmuted. Maybe you said this, and I apologize if you addressed it. I got on a little late. Now that the draft is out, some people are making good comments and want some editing. Are we not allowed to touch it now?
Oh no, yeah, you have till tomorrow. This whole point of today and posting was so that your colleagues here at Cross Sector could give you that feedback and help you revise your draft for tomorrow. But they'll be posted and shared to the council tomorrow, and then you'll have a whole week
I didn't
after the
understand
council meeting to finalize.
I thought last night was it.
I haven't. Yeah, I
and it was in somebody else's
yet.
hands. Okay, it's not in somebody else's hands to further edit. We can edit it still.
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions at this point?
Okay. All right, then we're going to hand it over to David Hill at EFG. And David, do you have slides, I assume, you want to share with us? Looks good. All right, floor is yours.
You're muted, David, if you are
Yeah, we
talking.
can see, yeah, we can see your slides. It's not in slideshow mode, but we can see them. And now we're seeing, I'm assuming others, we're seeing both your slide you want to show and the next
Right.
one up.
Yeah, I did this the backwards way again. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, somebody gave me a tip last time about
David, if you go up to just, yeah,
display settings, duplicate
Swap.
slideshow. How's that?
Now we don't see it at all.
Screen
some
sharing has stopped. Why is that? Let me try again. Sorry. You would think after practicing this a few times.
There you go.
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry about that. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. As Jane said, what we'd like to do is I'll present for the Cadmus EFG team. There are a lot of folks. We've been working with a lot of you, the cross-sector mitigation subcommittees, the task leads, stakeholders, an enormous number of people, the people at SEI who are helping with the modeling. So people supporting in the different state agencies. So we've been working, with a large number of people. And what we want to present today is a rather in-depth set of results from the CAP mitigation pathway, and review that with you and ask for your feedback about, if to present this to the Climate Council next week, what would be the most important elements to pull out? I'll go into, we've got about 45 slides to go through this morning, and our guess is that we'll be kind of in the range of 20 to 30 slides when we present to the Climate Council. So we would also like to ask for, feedback from the sector leads in terms of, are we capturing, with the work that you've been doing, just make sure that what we're doing is supportive of that work and capturing what you feel are the salient points that will help to support the recommendations that you're putting forward to the council next week. So why is this not moving forward? Sorry, again. Seems to be having a bit of a so I'll go through these, and what we'll look at is the CAP mitigation pathway overall, and then look sector by sector and by time period at what the implications for the the modeling outputs basically are, the inputs and the outputs from the modeling. We'll look at the economic results along with a couple results from comparison pathways, some of the sensitivity analysis that we've been able to complete, and then leave time for questions and discussions. I am curious today why the controls that forward the slides are not working. Okay. And I'm not sure which button I'm hitting, and it's forwarding it. Anyway, this is a reminder of where we are in the time frame. We did an initial pathways analysis and report with recommendations to some changes in the modeling that had been completed by SEI and the state. We presented that on September 30th, and we've had some discussions of those results with you all in the past. And then we are now in the process of developing our own narrative report And this presentation is part of, the material in this presentation will show up in the narrative report. There will be more detail in the narrative report, but that's due from us on November 15th, and looking again by 2025, 2030, and 2050 at the key elements of the pathway. So some terminology, I think that we wanted to, in reviewing with the different task leads and with Jane and with a number of people working in parallel, we felt that it was be helpful to set some common terminology, because there are various ways that these terms can be used, and we want to be as consistent and clear as we can in the climate action plan and with the council as possible. So what we're recommending is a consistent use of terminology along these ways. And the climate action plan basically takes us from where we are today, 2020, towards a set of targets in 2025, 2030, and 2050 through the use of pathways. Pathways, in LEAP, they are modeled as different scenarios, and they are the combination of the colored wedges that together reach a emissions reduction target in each of those time periods. So by 2025, you've got a certain set of a pathway with a certain set of wedges that get you to a target, and the same in 2030 and 2050. The wedges themselves, say the yellow wedge or the green wedge, blue wedge on top in this, would be strategies, so that there are things like weatherization at scale or combustion engine phase out, advanced heat pumps, ODS substitutes. Those are strategies. Those are the pieces, the elements, if you would, of the pathways, and combined they represent a pathway. Within those strategies, so within the individual wedges, the colored wedges, there are policies or programs that may happen at a certain time period, so that you or continually throughout a time period. So a policy or a program could be the adoption, implementation of clean heat standard, 100% renewable energy standard, replace your ride program, TCI program, those types of things. So those tend to happen, the black lines, that they'll either be at a discrete time and then they carry on through the time periods. And then the actions and activities are benchmarks of what happened within a wedge that gets us to the target. So that's represented by the dotted orange line within the yellow and the green wedges. So example of that would be something like 120,000 houses weatherized, or 60,000 EVs on the road. So hopefully, I know that there have been ways that we internally within our team, and then I know others have been using some of these terms in various different ways, and as a path, so hopefully this type of thing will provide some consistency across the work that everybody's doing, and help to communicate it in a clear and comprehensive fashion. So what I'll do is first we'll go through the CAT mitigation pathway, and so the pathway again is the combined set of wedges that meet the targets, and look at those results, and then we'll talk individually about each of the sector results, and I will compare it after we've done that then at a high level to the results of the biofuels focused in the local electricity pathways as well. So people by now are familiar with this chart. I've modified it somewhat so that now the transportation sector is at the bottom, and then the next three bars up are in essence the building sector. So residential in yellow, commercial in gray, and industrial in tan, and then agriculture, electricity, and transmission, distribution, and waste on top. So this is roughly ordered by the transportation sector being our largest source of emissions, and then the building sector following that, the combined emissions from the building sector. The GWSA targets in each of the time periods are represented by the arrows. And as we have discussed before, in the model currently, this is the 100-year global warming potential emissions from the CAT mitigation pathway, all fuels and statewide. So we, in essence, are overachieving, and the model and the activities that are represented by 2025 overachieve this target The reason that is because to reach then the 2030 target, you're on an extremely steep pathway here at the beginning. And so that's just it. The model actually currently, it's just the emissions are slightly above the 2030 target. And then slightly, the 2050, it's slightly below. But you know, and the model, as I go through this, it's important for us to emphasize, we've said this before, the LEAP model is not really, it's not predictive, but it's informative. So through discussions with the task leads, through stakeholders, experts and things, we have, there are strategies that, you know, everyone has discussed, strategies and policies that people have discussed. And the modeling helps to put those into a pathway and say, well, these are the levels of activity that you would need to achieve to, you know, it's almost like waypoints or, you know, benchmarks along the way. This is the level of activity you'd need to achieve to get these level of emissions reductions in each time period. But again, it's not predictive. It's not, we're not saying, oh, there was a policy implemented here, and so predictively by 2030, this many vehicles will be on the road. It's not a predictive model, and it's not even prescriptive, but it's informative to the policies and programs that we need to be able to reach these targets. Let me go into the sector modeling now, and we'll start with the transportation sector. And I think today—
Hey, David.
Yeah.
We might want to pause after each section just for questions, since it's a lot of information to carry through, and there's an active set of questions in the chat already. So maybe I'll invite Jared to make his comment first, and then I know it'll add time, but I think it'll be helpful in the end.
Thank you. I was just gonna, yeah.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks, David. Sorry, David, I know you can't,
No,
or you
that's fine.
should be reading the chat as you're presenting. That's difficult multitasking. So just two quick things. One is on the first couple of slides. I think it would be important and appropriate to use the language of GWSA requirements for 2025, 2030, and 2050. I think there's two slides that refers to them as targets. I think that the word target is problematic because you can miss a target. We can't miss legal piece. And then there was another piece raised by Ken Jones about the baseline starting year. The latest full set of inventory, greenhouse gas inventory data we have for Vermont is 2018. I see the first year in that last slide that you just showed as 2020. Is that mislabeled? Should that be 2018, or are you starting with a projection for 2020 that is not as solid as the 2018 numbers?
That's a good question, Jared. What we've done, and we could adjust this, we could adjust everything to project from 2018 to 2030. I'm just taking, the LEAP model has 2018 in it, and then it has 2020 for both the baseline and the pathways. And I was kind of feeling that it was more, a little cleaner and just more informative to start from 2020. But if we decide to adjust that to report from 2018, I can do that relatively easily. But it's good to know because all the graphics and other things would be changed. We've tended to adopt the 2020 to forward convention.
I'm just writing in the chat. I would prefer, I don't know if others agree. I would prefer to start with 2018 since that's the latest full data we have and can be confident in, whereas 2020 would be a projection without the firm data sources at this point.
Okay. Other questions right now? I'm not, Jane, I'll let you or someone else moderate the questions or.
No other hands, so
Okay.
you can proceed.
Okay. So looking a little bit more at the transportation sector, and here, this is, again, we're starting at 2018, but we could probably, what we would do is adjust this to the 2020 number would represent 2018 and then do 2025 and 2030. So the sector emissions reductions are 15% by 2025 and 36% by 2030, 89% by 2050. Those are compared to the 2020 level. Primarily, those come from, this is the emissions, again, using the 100-year global warming potential. primarily from transition to electric vehicles. They are both more efficient and using a cleaner fuel, using electricity. Biofuels and VMT reductions also play some reduction or some contributing role to meeting the targets through the transportation sector. So the slide that we just looked at was were the emissions. The next two panels show the final energy demand. So this now is in million or in trillion BTUs. So we're going from the 40 trillion BTUs, 40 plus, down to less than half of that by 2050. So this reflects the increased efficiency of the electric vehicles and the reduced amount of demand. And then the device stocks are on the right, where you see the red and the light blue and the yellow increasing rapidly. Those are the electric vehicles, the increase of electric vehicles, the gasoline vehicles declining as the blue goes. That's the stock. And so there still is stock. We also have there's information in the model on the sales and the share of sales each year that are associated with each of the vehicle types. So looking a little more in depth or a layer down, by 2025 in the CAP mitigation pathway, there are 43,000 EVs, which is an increase of more than 39,000 over today. So a significant number, a very large number. By 2025, EVs are almost 40% share of light duty vehicle sales. And all major automakers have invested in EV technology, and there's expected to be release of additional EV models in the coming years, including for the light duty trucks, sport utility vehicles, but these numbers, and this is the light duty truck, that panel, this is the light duty truck sales. So by 2025, you're looking at, this is a little over 10,000 out of the 25,000 sales that would be EV. The blue is EVs there. And you see the share of gasoline declining by 2033, disappearing in the yellow. These rates, excuse me, shouldn't have jumped there. The rates that are in the model currently, it's important to recognize, precede or are more accelerated, kind of, or faster than what the Advanced Clean Cars 2 California discussions are currently, which would require manufacturers to deliver an increasing share of light duty EVs starting in 2026, ramping up to 100% in 2035. So that may not be the Advanced Clean Cars 2 could be a floor rather than a ceiling, but it's important to recognize that, things like that are at a slower pace than what the level of adoption that's reflected in the model currently is showing. By 2030, for the transportation sector, 166,000 electric vehicles, almost 4 times greater than the baseline projection, which would be 43,000 electric vehicles by 2030. By 2030, EVs account for 29% of the total vehicle miles traveled. So the graphic on the right shows vehicle miles by class, by type. And so by 2030, the electric vehicles, which are, again, this wedge on the wedges here and then here, are representing almost a third of the vehicle miles traveled. By 2030 as well, there's been a reduction from the baseline of 3.5% from the vehicle miles traveled compared to the baseline. There's a steady ramp of VMT reduction spending, and by 2050, the total VMT reduction is 10%. 50% of the EV charging is managed to reduce peak impacts by 2030, and the sales of new internal combustion vehicles is phased out by 2033. So new sales, there's still, due to stock turnover, there's still internal combustion engines on the road after that, but the sale of new ICE vehicles is phased out by 2033. So considering for the transport sector, the CAP mitigation pathway by 2025 and 2030, there is a shift in the technologies in the market, that's trending towards electric vehicles. It's underway. It's national, it's global, it's not limited to Vermont, and it's truly, we're looking at a different set of vehicles. To match the level that is in the model of adoption, these rates of 43,000 and 166,000, it will be necessary to, incentives, extensive public messaging and promotion to support rapid adoption will be important. There needs to be particular attention to equity and reducing transportation energy burden. Regional and national initiatives participating in those is certainly necessary to support these levels of adoption, but it may not be sufficient to achieve those levels of adoption. Managed charging and smart rate designs will help to encourage the adoption rates and to reduce the impacts on the electric grid. Revenue options to support the policies and programs can include participation in the transportation climate initiatives and potentially federal funds. But still, when all is said and done, the required pace of change is quite significant. It's very daunting, but it's an essential component of meeting the GWSA requirements and the challenge of the climate imperative. So the policy, the policies, strategies, and actions that are necessary to support achieving these levels of activity that are in the CAP mitigation pathway include the Transportation Climate Initiative and initiatives that could be supported through revenue generated by the TCI, such as replace your ride, increase transit spending, smart growth and transportation demand management, potential fee baits to encourage more efficient vehicles, and managed charging. So let me stop there. I think that's the transportation sector presentation. Let me stop and see if we have questions or comments.
Well, and this would be a good place for Joey and Gina to kind of give you some guidance on what they think is the most important points to raise to the council. So Joey.
I have a couple of questions first, and then we can explore that.
Yeah.
First, David, I think we've asked you this before, but Brian's raising it in the chat, and I have the same question, which is, why, again, are we modeling for the Vermont ICE phase out prior to what's in Advanced Clean Cars 2, which is 2035? And okay, that's my first question. Then I have another one.
That has not been adjusted in the model. It could, we could adjust that by 2 years to reflect the phase out being later. That was in the initial modeling that was done related to the comprehensive energy plan. That was the phase out date, and yeah, that's a point we can adjust. I think relatively easily the phase out date can be adjusted, and that would drop these numbers somewhat.
I mean,
do you know the rationale behind, I guess, or does Ed or anybody know? Because it would be interesting just to understand why the CEP chose to do it with 2033, if there's a real reason behind that.
I don't know if Jeff, my colleague from Cadmus, is on the phone. I know he has mentioned in the past some discussions about the date and potential, those dates potentially changing based on discussions that are kind of ongoing. So whether it's part of the I don't know whether at an earlier date there was potentially a 2033 and that's now been shifted back to 2035. It may be when the modeling was initially done that this 2033 was an anticipated date for the phase out.
well, it'd be helpful to understand a little bit better, but I do think since 2035 is the target in Advanced Clean Cars 2, and that's what we're recommending. If it's not too difficult, I think it's very important that it all is sort of symmetrical, just kind of like what we're
Yeah.
asking about the 2018 date, which I would love for us to clarify if we feel like collectively that the 2018 as opposed to 2020 makes more sense. Anyway, so I mean, I think if you can go forward really quickly to TCI, and this maybe gets, if you can go forward a little bit more. Okay. So this, I just highlight this because this slide, I think, is a good reflection of why when you see TCI in our sort of, strategies and actions list, you see it showing up more than once. That is because, I mean, not only, are we recommending TCI for the benefits the cap will deliver in greenhouse gas emissions over a decade,
Right.
but potentially even more so is the revenues that it will raise to drive the programs that we currently need to expand and accelerate. And those programs, as you see in our overview, are in the vehicle electrification, light and heavy duty space, as well as in some of the things that you're highlighting here in terms of the transportation demand management strategy. So I just wanted to, let folks know, like, that's sort of the rationale for it, and it is, I think, a priority, and we'd love to spend some time here. Anyway, that's some thoughts, and I'll turn it over to Gina, and I may have some more comments.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. I'm frankly blown away by these numbers, and I'm very concerned that we're not going to be able to get there. I mean, to understand what you said in the beginning, these specific path or strategies or whatever they're called now, the initiatives listed on the slide that's before us at the moment, the devil will be in the detail of those to determine if they or something else are needed to get to those numbers, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's so important for everybody to understand, because those numbers are so big. This is one attempt. That list that you see there and more that's on our tables are some ideas of how we could get there. We know there's some really good benefits, but nobody can say those things will get us to that number of vehicles, correct?
I think that that's important, and Gina, what's gonna be apparent as we go through the rest of these slides is, think of it that it's not just the number of electric vehicles, it's the number of heat pumps, it's the number of heat pump water heaters, it's the number of weatherizations, and all of this happening at once is a massive challenge. The numbers are very daunting, and we want to present them in a way that's informative. And it's not predicting that these will get there, but these are very large numbers, and so we need to be really effective and impactful on how we can use these policies and programs to the greatest benefit, and also the public messaging of, like, we need to change the way, we really need to change at a very rapid pace. Business as usual. So yeah, I appreciate, and we want to make sure that we're not presenting it as that it's predicted that if you say join TCI, that those are the numbers that you will hit, right?
Okay. So this begs the question of Liz's earlier point to Jane and company. There needs to be language in this report, and it's not going to be in each of our little sections about what this modeling is and isn't, vis-a-vis what David just explained. I think that's so important. And I'm just throwing it out there. And maybe you can help write that.
We've been working on that, and I think developing over time. Liz H. or Jane, feel free to provide comments here. We've been having discussions along those lines as we've been working on our own narrative and on the presentation. So, maybe that's something that's important to highlight potentially for the VCC at the beginning as well.
Thanks.
Jared, and then
Jeff is going to hop on.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Catherine, up on what David said. Jeff is on, but I think that to the question about sort of the timeline for the phase out, it is also what David said, is sort of we're trying to meet the targets. And that does require sort of action sooner than what California has planned. And Gina, definitely resonate with your comment, and think what David is saying about sort of don't get hung up too much on like the specific number. It's meant to be informative on sort of the pace and scale of change and the level of transformation that Vermont is going to need to support. Sorry to jump in there, Catherine.
No problem. So Jared, to you.
Thanks, Catherine. I just want to respond on a couple of points. First, to Gina's about it's difficult to see how this may happen. I also think that there are many examples from history that give us a lot of suggestion that this is more than possible. I think we tend to think linearly about things increasing at a standard rate of change, but what we see with disruptive technology, whether it was cell phones, the radio, televisions, the first introduction of the internal combustion engine, is that oftentimes when these technologies come into the marketplace and costs go down, we see geometric and exponential adoption rates rather than linear. We may even already be seeing the beginning of that. I think we are on electric vehicles. I just posted in the chat, you know, the share of new vehicle purchase registrations that are electric has more than doubled already in the last year. And certainly we're going to need to continue on that trajectory. But I think, as David said, if we look ahead to these market signals that are coming out in terms of plans of manufacturers, in terms of technology forcing regulations from California and New York has signed on to that requirement of all new vehicle sales being zero emissions by 2035. There is significant reason to think that that we can achieve these numbers. And so I just want to pause to make sure that we remind ourselves that market transformations often need to be thought of in terms of the possibility for rapid geometric progress rather than just continuing linearly. I also want to say on the modeling that I think, you know, there are some, to my mind, there are some policies where we can model the projected impact in emissions reduction. I think, you know, for instance, on the clean heat standard, as proposed, that is designed to achieve the thermal fuel sector share of emissions reduction. So we can count that as a projected 34% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. I think TCI is similar, although it's a little bit more complicated because it's regional rather than a statewide program. But I think it would be appropriate at this point to project that 30% reduction as a result of TCI, both from the cap and then the revenue investments that will be possible from a suite of activities. I think the value of this modeling, though, is not to say, here are the suite of policies that will get you to the goal. We do not yet have enough information to say that. I think it's more to say, with those policies, and in addition, the other, I'm not going to get the terminology right, but the other measures, the other policies and programs that we can adopt, they will need to add up to hitting these action targets. And so for a lot of these things, whether it's a replace your ride program or whether it is a vehicle efficiency price adjustment, what we're probably going to need to do is say, okay, we can count on something like a clean heat standard getting us this far, TCI likely to get us this far. In terms of the balance, we need to make sure that we design those programs, whether they're regulations or whether they're incentives, to hit those targets. I don't think we should interpret this modeling as saying the things on the table are going to get us there. We're going to need to be responsive as each year passes and we get more and more data about key adoption rates. And we're going to have to design programs to hit those targets to make sure that these things come true.
Thanks for that positive note, Jared. And it sounds like that goes to sort of the framing of the model and what it is and what it isn't. I want to be sure we spend as much of the time as possible just making sure that there's any adjustments that might be needed, but also where any guidance you have for David in terms of what you would like to see raised up for the council and what you think maybe isn't as important as well. So Joey, you had another
Well, I
idea?
mean, I have many more things to say, but in service of getting to everyone else as well, I mean, I'd like to sit with it for a while. Maybe Gina and I can confer and like highlight the crucial slides that we think are going to be required if we need to call, because I'm hearing you say we have to call.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm not prepared to do that.
Yes, we have to call a lot. I just want to be clear on that. So it's not a matter of 1 or 2 slides, but we only have, I think, half an hour total for the presentation on Tuesday. And I really think it's important for us to get to the dialogue. So want to do that.
And it's important too, to recognize, as Jane said, the change that it will be both Rich and Peter, and they'll be presenting before we present the modeling. So it won't be the modeling first and then the presentation from Rich and Peter. It will be them going first. And so what are the highlights that we can use to best support and amplify the points that each sector wants to be making and that they're putting forward. So I think some of the quantitative results, but it needs to be pretty compact. All of this material and more will be in our report, but
Oh, who are we talking on? Oh, nice. I think somebody needs to mute there. And let Liz in before we.
Sure,
back.
thanks. Yeah, it was just on that point, and David, you just said it. This is all available, obviously, on today's agenda. Let's make it available in the link to all counselors as is with the long deck, and then do,
that's a good point.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to say it's easy because it's definitely not easy, but it feels like that's the best way to address this. Give everybody the full deck and let them look through it amply. And then when we cut it down to, I would suggest that we figure out a way to essentially do a parallel slide for each sector so that you perhaps take the first of the colored slides, the detailed by car type for transportation, and then do something similar with the heating one, not the vehicle miles traveled one, but yeah, exactly. So that maybe it's the bar chart for everyone. Anyway, some parallelism so that we have 5 to 7 slides and the backup has been given to everybody.
That's a good idea. It's a real good idea. Gina, do you want to say something else before we move on to the next sector?
No, I just forgot to take my hand down.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right. So, buildings.
And there will be a theme here. The numbers are very large. And if you think about it, it's the combination of all of these and how Jared, I think your optimism is important. There are shifts in the technologies and markets that are out there. And we just need to also be clear-headed about how large these numbers and how rapid a change is required to meet the requirements. For the building sector, the emissions reductions from 2020 to 2030 are 45% and 80% by 2050. Most of them are coming from the residential sector, about a third from commercial, and a 12% reduction from industrial. This then shows for the residential on the left and then the commercial on the right, the emissions reductions. And the thing to emphasize here is that it's primarily the space heating, which is the reddish on the left hand. And the space heating reductions come from a combination of heat pumps and shell efficiency. And so again, heat pumps have a higher, similar to the transportation sector, we have both a higher efficiency and a cleaner fuel with a heat pump, and the shell efficiency gives us even greater efficiency gains. Same thing in commercial, it's primarily space heating. And just the miscellaneous and the miscellaneous is combined with it's a number of end uses and fuels that in the disaggregation and from data that's available to disaggregate heat, energy use is just assigned as a miscellaneous category. But the primary message here is that it is space heating along with water heating and then cooking are the primary areas where we have reductions. Another important element in the building sector related to the clean heat standard is that blended heating oil and increased renewable natural gas blending also both contribute to emissions reductions. But the primary reductions are definitely coming from the heat pumps, from there being more efficient and cleaner fuel. By 2025 in the building sector, the green bars here represent the baseline, and then the blue represents the total in addition to the baseline. So the total number of heat pumps by 2025 is 80,000, almost 50,000 above baseline. Very large numbers, but we are seeing, rapid adoption, not just in Vermont, but Maine and elsewhere. But this is a real increase from where even those numbers would be. 60,000 heat pump water heaters, more than 60,000 units weatherized, so weatherization at scale. More than twice what the baseline is. With the heat pump water heaters, it would be even more than, the heat pump water heaters have a lower activity, and so the increase over baseline is even greater, but the same number of roughly over 60,000 by 2025. And then about 1.9 trillion tera-BTUs of biofuels in the mix. And just assuming to give some comparison, assuming that the biofuels would be meeting the full needs of a household, they'll be blended, but it would be the equivalent of roughly 20,000 just using biofuels. So those, again, those are very, very large numbers, very, very much beyond what the current baseline is. And, important to have identified as points that are along that path to the 2025 reduction. This looks at the emissions reductions across, by 2025, across all of the different sectors. So this is residential, industrial, and commercial, and showing that it's the residential sector is the largest by 2025, but the commercial sector also has a related reduction from the adoption of heat pumps. And the heat pumps are and biofuels for commercial sector, and in the industrial sector it's more adoption of biofuels. Heat pumps are gaining rapid market share, more than 11,000 being installed in 2020, but this is obviously continued rapid adoption and increase of the adoption rate. Workforce development will be essential to scale activity in the building sector, and that can include both wages and training. And the level of coaching and financing will be very important supports for folks to be able to adopt one or more multiple building sector technologies. How do they sequence? How do they afford to finance? Potentially weatherization and heating system change outs, looking at both the heating system as well as hot water heating and those types of things. So significant efforts across those areas will be important to supporting the level of adoption that's required. By 2030, this is a somewhat different slide. This compares different, these are in essence kind of the different wedges that are contributing to the pathway. And these are all at the current point in LEAP. We eventually will have something that will solve all of these concurrently and compare and provide a least cost mix. Right now, each of these elements as an individual scenario is compared individually to the baseline, which is up here on the top. And this is the level of detail that I think is helpful for you all, but we won't be presenting to the Climate Council. But these compare the emissions reductions for all these different elements from the building sector individually to the baseline. The largest reductions here are the heat pump space heating. The second is water heating heat pumps. Then the blue line, the third one up, the blue line is the B100 in industry. Then the phase out of cooking for fossil fuels for cooking. And then additional are other biofuels, advanced wood heating, weatherization at scale. So all of them have, these aren't just, we can't just completely sum all of these together. They're interactive effects, and solving that in the LEAP model actually is underway, but it's quite significant to let them all solve and then retroactively choose the methods that will be part of the pathway and present a kind of there'll be a marginal abatement cost curve associated with that. But by 2030, more than 142,000 residential heat pumps, which is 84,000 above the baseline. Phase out of water heating and cooking are underway, so they phase out by 2040. Weatherization of 120,000 units and biofuels have an increasing contribution to the reductions. So those are the elements that are incorporated in terms of meeting the 2030 goal. And then this chart just gives you a sense of the scale and how important the heat pumps are compared to the other elements. Residential buildings, there is an important element related to the equity and inclusivity. The 2030 and the 2050, the number of residential units by building type weatherized, we have adjusted the model so that it overrepresents as a share of the population apartments and mobile homes, so that the number of weatherizations is still, the majority of weatherizations are in single family detached and rural single family detached in all time periods. But the other rural apartments, urban apartments, mobile homes in the urban and rural sector are all represented more highly, reflecting the importance of making sure that income qualified Vermonters are able to get weatherization and space heating conversion assistance and participation. The chart on the right shows the share of heat pumps by time period, and we can see here by 2040 they're achieving almost 80% of the space heating needs are being met by heat pumps. So this goes across all different heating fuels, including importantly biomass fuels as well. In the CAP mitigation there, the heat pumps are replacing both the fossil fuels and the biomass fuels, again, as a result of their efficiency and the cleaner fuel. The commercial buildings, the CAP mitigation pathway, these are, this just shows by end use, the reductions over time with space heating providing the almost, the bulk of the emissions reductions from the commercial sector are coming from space heating, as we've said. And this then shows, the one on the right shows by heating system types, the emissions from the bottom fuels are the conventional fossil fuels here, and over time they're reduced, and you see the avoided emissions by time period for the space heating bar. So this up to, on the right, the one that's over 500 is the equivalent of the green bar that's on the top of the left-hand chart. Industry for the CAP mitigation pathway, the important elements here. Industrial, this is industrial final energy demand. So as the economy continues to grow, the industrial final energy demand, including efficiency activities, but it is projected to increase in terms of final energy demand. What helps to reduce emissions is the growth of the orange and then the gray vertically striped bar are the representation of biogas and biodiesel. And so there's an increased consumption of biofuels in the industrial sector, representing about 4 teraBTUs, or about a quarter of the demand, final energy demand out in 2050. And that 4 teraBTUs on the right-hand side, I put biogas and biodiesel in all sectors. The 4 teraBTUs is a relatively large share of the total overall increase in the CAP mitigation pathway of biofuels, which goes up to a little over 7. So industrial use of biofuels, biogas and biodiesel is an important element in the reductions in the industrial sector. There are potentially opportunities that we'll discuss when we get to the electric sector with the potential use of or further strategic electrification in the industrial sector that's not represented currently. By 2050, with the cap mitigation pathway for the building sector, we have, as Dave Farnsworth in the presentations that Dave and Christine have worked hard on, you know, it's emphasized there's a need for a modernized building infrastructure. There are electrified end uses, grid interactive and connected buildings that help to coordinate multiple loads across multiple sites, storage for resilience and to help reduce the peak loads, reduced energy burdens for buildings, so efficient shells, and greater on-site generation. Again, this shows the chart on the right here shows the discounted social cost by element. These are not, again, completely additive in the way the model is solving currently. There will be one that solves them all together, but these are just compared individually back to the baseline. Again, we see that the heat pumps are significantly, so below the baseline level here is kind of a net savings. The ones above the baseline have a net cost. I will show results that have the cap mitigation scenario in combination with all of these elements later in the presentation today. But the elements currently, heat pumps are very cost effective. The heat pump phase out for the water heating and cooking is here. And then the biofuels and some of the renewable, the biofuels.
Hi, Dawn.
Scale are
Good. Thank you for your persistence and mine.
Michelle,
slight
you need
net
to
cost.
have, if you can mute, Michelle. We're hearing
Everything
your
is good.
conversation.
I just took a couple of weeks off and went to California and
I don't know, Jane, if
traveled
you
along the
We need to
coast.
have
And it
a-
was really
yep.
beautiful. So that was
I'm
Getting
great.
a
trying to
little bit
find
of-
her on the list.
So the, I'll try to keep going
I
here.
got her.
For the building sector, the cap mitigation pathways for buildings, key policies, strategies, and actions to reach the cap mitigation pathway, to reach these numbers, to reach these levels of activity, need to be supported by elements such as policies and programs, strategies, and actions, such as the Clean Heat Standard, a rental efficiency initiative that would require upgrades over a certain period of time for rental properties. That's, I mentioned the importance of apartments and the weatherization at scale, a phase out of fossil cooking and water heating to electrification. Currently, it's in the model as by 2040. New construction standards that are net zero, so that new buildings, which have, you know, a very long life, the building infrastructure has lower turnover rate than vehicles. Make sure that those have highest levels of thermal efficiency and again are designed to be net zero through the use of appropriate technologies and fuels, and then increased demand response and coordinated load management to help reduce the requirements for the electric sector and to help improve resilience and those types of.
Does that wrap up the buildings?
Flexible load management.
Okay.
That does wrap up buildings.
So Jane has pointed out that Kaya is scheduled to be with us at 12:15. So we need to maybe give Christine a chance to respond, have any answered questions that she might have, as well as any suggestions she might have for what to highlight here.
Yep.
And then we may need to take,
Keep moving.
yeah, well, no, I think what we'll do is we'll probably take Kaya when she joins us, and then we'll have to come
Okay.
back. If that's all
Okay.
right.
That's fine.
Great, thank you. Dave Farnsworth is with family in Iceland this week. So I'm going to be the voice of our team. Nice work, David Hill, really appreciate it. I very much support Liz Miller's suggestion that we come up with a similar template for slides for each of the sectors.
Okay.
I would really encourage you to think very carefully about the exact messaging that you're using with the Climate Council. and that we roll up the level of detail a little bit so that things like the concepts, for example, that we can reach the targets with proven technology that's cost effective today, already on the market, and for which there's some, supply and service infrastructure already in place, although it needs to be expanded. I think that really basic stuff needs to be said in front of the council, because there are some council members who will not automatically know that or choose to remember it. So I would really encourage, looking at this a little bit more from the outside looking in, and thinking about how we're trying to move the council as a body to being able to vote on this stuff, as opposed to informing them on exactly how we can reach these targets. And I'm sure you know that anyway, but I haven't heard that kind of message through these conversations, so I felt the need to say that right now. I also would like to work with you on the exact wording with these mitigation pathways on slide 24 that's showing right now, or whatever the next version of that slide is for the Vermont Climate Council, because although we're not saying things that differently, the language you're using in some ways is different than the language we're using in the pathway strategies, actions, tables and text that we've just forwarded for the CAP. And so, for example, I wouldn't suggest calling out fossil cooking and water heating phase out. While hopefully the clean heat standard would result in that happening over time, we don't have a program or a policy or a statement keying in on that. And I don't think we need to right now. I understand why it's in the modeling. I'm not suggesting it not be in the modeling, but I don't think it's a primary talking point if you have 5 minutes or less to talk about buildings thermal with the VCC next Tuesday. So we need to align our language a little bit more. And if these slides can be sent, I'll write an email that just suggests slight reorienting of your messaging for purposes of that presentation moving forward. Along the same line, I think the CAP mitigation pathway is a term that I understand why you're using, and I understand why it will keep happening, and that's fine. But if you could state very simply up front for the VCC that the core of this pathway work are two basic approaches: reducing energy use in buildings by at least 25% and reducing the carbon content of the fuels used to heat and to provide heating in those buildings. So it's really clear the link between how we've built the text in the CAP document and how you message that the link of your work to that text. And I'll send you the cheat sheet table I did this morning that puts our pathway strategies and actions in one very simple table, so you can see, and the wording in that table is mimicking the exact wording that's in the CAP document that we submitted yesterday, which we are not going to be running around changing other than a few edited suggestions we've had from a few people already. Those are my comments. I hope that's helpful.
Those are helpful. Thank you. Definitely.
Great, Christine. That's very succinct too. And I wonder if there's anybody else in subcommittee that had any comments or clarifications before we move to public comment. Jane, did you want to have public comment and then here and then again at the end?
Yeah, I think that's we put that on the agenda and we need to respect that. So yes.
Any other comments from the subcommittee before we do that?
I do want to suggest, I know this is a lot to ask of David and Liz, but I'd like to take public comment and offer the chance for the subcommittee to discuss with Kaya any concerns or questions, mindful of her time commitment. And then if there's time to pick this back up, we can do that before moving on.
Sure.
I don't see Kaya yet. Yeah, David?
Would you like me to keep
She's
these
here.
up, or should I stop sharing?
You should stop sharing. And yeah, Kaya is here. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, let's
Yeah,
quickly move then to public comment. Is anybody that from the public have anything you would like to raise up at this point? We'll have another opportunity at the end. Okay, I am not seeing anything. It seems like, we've covered this territory so many times. So, oh, George Gross, what would you like to add at this point? There you go.
Good morning. I'm a little
Morning.
late starting today. I had some other commitments I had to handle. I did want to offer a cautionary note about the reliance on biofuels, liquid biofuels, and solid biofuels. Specific to liquid biofuels, over the long term, the premise seems to be that you would increase the blending as a percentage with commensurate increase in reduced emissions. Yet at this point, it's unclear to me whether liquid biofuels will scale on a national level to the level that one would have hoped. There's a ongoing lot of R&D about second generation biofuels that have a better life cycle emissions footprint than is the case with the first generation ones, which are based on soybeans and corn ethanol. Specific to heating fuels, it's based on a biodiesel pathway, which is dependent currently on soybeans. They've spent a lot of R&D on the cellulistic pathway to establish more and less greenhouse gas emission pathway. And it is not clear to me that that's commercially viable at this point. And it's not clear what, barring a breakthrough on that part of the problem, whether it would actually scale. It certainly, in all cases, looks like a large amount of land use. So to the extent that you can choose other pathways that do not rely on that approach, that liquid biofuels, and get customers locked into that approach, avoiding that would be a good thing, because yeah, I think it's on shaky ground. Thank you.
Thank you, George. I think there was a comment earlier on as you're going through your presentation about the use of biofuels in the commercial sector and in the chat. All right, any other public comments? Yes, Matt.
Yes, so we are reaching scale with biodiesel, renewable diesel production now at 3 billion gallons. And renewable diesel has a quality of being chemically the same as fossil fuel diesel, which we use in heating applications. We have mandates in New York, in Connecticut, and in Rhode Island. And we have a similar program to the Clean Heat program in Massachusetts. It's how we are going to meet our carbon reduction goals. So it's not if we're going to get to scale or if it will be here, it's going to be how we meet these mandates. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? One last call for public comments. I can't see everybody, so if you could raise your virtual hand, that would make it easier. All right. So Kaya is here, and she agreed to come back so that any of the task leads, as you were going through your equity screen and had any questions or needs, and Jane, maybe you want to lead into this, but that she could be here to answer some of those lingering problems. Jane, do you want to say something else?
No, thank you, Catherine. I just wanted to appreciate that Kaya's back, and I know this is a little bit free form, and appreciate Kaya if she has some words to kick us off too, but know that over the course the last week, you all were really diving in deep to drafting, and as a component of that, we're using the equity scoring rubric as a screen that you were lifting your actions up through, and we're trying to speak to all of the actions to the best of your ability with that screen in mind. So just wanted to make sure we provided a space to have any questions fielded or any answer, any back and forth you'd like to have at this time. And recognize and appreciate that if there's a better time to do this as we move through the process, we can also consider how we revisit this in the coming weeks. So thanks, Kaya, and look forward to all of you if you have any questions, leading the conversation on.
Did you want to say anything, Kaya, before we start taking hands?
I do appreciate that. Yeah, no, so I did have an opportunity to kind of glance through some of the early drafts that you all have. And I'm definitely curious to also hear kind of your feelings as it's like, how do we encapsulate the breadth of the work that the equity is screening is looking for and its specificity versus how we summarize this in a way that still has meaning for our public audience who's like, well, that sounds like a big lofty words that I don't know what that means, you know, from my direct life. And so what that felt like for you all, and how we can best again try to convey that somewhere in some form or in some shape, because there has been really important thoughtfulness built into the work that you all are doing. So yeah, I'm happy to kind of go through that. And just as a reminder, again, as I mentioned at the Climate Council meeting this week, we are working on an evaluative process that will most likely be a combination of online quick answers ranking, being able to fill in with short answers, as well as an opportunity if people would prefer to do 15-minute conversations to kind of go through those questions themselves or go through their evaluation of this experience themselves. So I just want to let you know that will exist in the world.
Thanks. Liz, your hand went up first.
Sure. Thanks, Kaya. Yeah, I'm interested in your feedback, and it might be that just as a subcommittee, we'll talk about it a little bit later as well. Just in terms of level of detail in the charts when it comes to the equity piece, at least in our draft, and it looked like from what I saw this morning, some others did this as well, we tried to signal a little bit, like it wasn't just depends, it was depends and depends upon, you know, making sure programs are targeted at the right communities and individuals. So figuring out the right level of detail and whether that's helpful and consistent with what your expectations would be, I think would be really helpful to me, because it kind of gets to the struggle I was having with the chart. And it's great to have it streamlined, but it's also somewhat frustrating not to be able to say everything. So anyway, reactions on that would be super helpful.
I appreciate that, Liz. That was kind of the sense that I had when I was reading it, and it was actually kind of it was hard. It was hard to do that, and seeing that again, knowing that you all have started getting into that space of thinking about what are the direct impacts on different populations. How does this help to bring about equity, other than just kind of larger visions of how it might impact inequities and to bring about equity. In a way that again will be resonant for the audience, where they're like, okay, they're doing it. They're doing this and they're doing it differently. And I don't know how to resolve that. I did see those within the narrative portions of trying to speak to that. And so I'm still very vested in trying to find a way, even if it's not within this particular draft, but there needs to be something that still speaks to that. So I will have a report that I have to submit to you all with regards to this. And I don't know if that perhaps becomes a space that we can tease out a little bit more to document somewhere your good work on this equity, so that it's not just lost. Because again, once it goes live, it's a living thing and the public's going to take it on its face. So it's hard to add that narrative back in once it's not there. That's just the way that it flows. So I appreciate your comments on that, and I'm happy to continue to creatively think about how we do that, or how Just Transitions Committee might be able to speak a little bit more to it, but it won't get into the specificity of what you all are starting to process through as you're thinking about your actions. So I do apologize and wish that there was a world in between, but I'm again invested in trying to figure that out. So.
Anybody else want to take advantage of Kaya's time while we have it? Any reactions you had as you were going through it that you just want to share? Well, I'm curious if people just find that it worked well. Sounds like if you're not raising up concerns, does that mean that generally you felt it worked well? And Seeing some nodding heads. Yeah, Joey.
I mean, I think it's helpful to frame out and really drive the thinking around and like really focus on those questions. So I think it was a helpful process, and it's still, I think it's an ongoing process. And I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. And two things, which is I'm trying to think about, there is a lack of specificity, but I'm hoping that we have enough specificity to guide the ongoing sort of policymaking arenas where we hand off this work and others take it up, so that it because again, I'm like not the right person to answer some of these questions. So we're trying to get it as far as possible with this. It's a really important tool. And then the second thing for me, it really, listening to Senator Keisha Ram Hinsdale, I very much, I'm just going to put it out here again, would love to see, the council recommend and us get behind an environmental justice policy for the state of Vermont, so that we can be doing this more holistically and have that umbrella to provide some of the metrics and the definitions and sort of the framework that we need to fundamentally do this a lot better in the Climate Council and beyond. So anyway, I appreciate it. I think of it as iterative, and those are two sort of comments which speaks to you're vested in it, I'm vested in it, and I hope that we can get others vested in it as we hand off our work or continue to iterate on it, past December 1st, past March 1st, and into the future.
Mm-hmm. What would that feel like for you, Joe? Is that something where, as you're reporting to the legislature, so we have the cap, but then there's a whole other thing that happens once the legislature gets the cap. Is that the place where we come back with further report? One of the recommendations I've been making to some for consideration is, how do you frame it in a way to say, we're hoping, legislature, that when you're thinking about your effective dates for any bills that come out of this, which is separate from a rulemaking process, right? Different timelines. But if we're coming forth with proposals in this way, can we think about our effective dates so that we can push for that screening to continue to be, to continue in its process as a part of getting the bill done? But I know that you also as well were really trying really hard to get that into the work that you were doing with some of the different initiatives that you were the lead on, Joey. So I would love to hear your thoughts about, where that goes for you, having recognized that the cap.
Yeah, no, I am not sure. I know that we have a citizen-led legislature. They're not going to take up everything that we're going to put forward overnight. And so I don't know. I need to think more about that question. But I also think that, maybe the effective date is a key component. I'm not sure. I also think we need to move on making progress that we've long delayed. I think harkening back to the conversation we were having earlier about the magnitude and of the numbers. Well, part of the reason these numbers are so maybe overwhelming to some, but I think realistic, in many ways in terms of the scale of the challenge we face, is we got to move. I was looking back at pictures from Step It Up in 2006 when we're on the State House lawn. It's like we've been saying the same things for a very long time, and we've just failed to do the work. And this is the moment we need to do the work. We need to do the work well, and we need to sort of move forward on those things that are like we can make equitable based on everything that we have done to date, and then do more and iterate over time. So I want to think about through that with you and others to what that looks like in the 2020 legislative session.
And it could, and Joey as well, and it could as well. It's not also unusual for bills to have multiple effective dates for different components. So if there are certain technical pieces that can need to move forward, but then there's implementation components that need to still be fleshed out, those can have separate effective dates within the same bill. I'm always both and. I'm always trying to find a way to get to a yes and. So that's just to say. So again, we're going to continue to try to think creatively so that we can make those worlds exist together without getting off from where we need to be. Other thoughts for folks?
Yeah, any of the other task leads, particularly that went through this process, share your experience. I guess that leaves you, Christine, because Peter's not here. So I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add before we let Kaya go.
Are you asking?
Yes, for buildings. I mean, your experience with that.
It's
You're
been
good?
good. Yes, good.
All right.
Yay. Can I just ask Kaya one more question? I'm
Please.
curious if, like, in your work with some of the other subcommittees, how it's working, or if they have strategies, or if there are tips or tricks or like approaches that would be helpful, that you've gleaned, that would be helpful for us to hear from and learn from and think about as we're continuing this work.
So the other committees are in a very different place as far as their different proposals are concerned. And so rural resilience is doing a little bit of a step back at this moment, whereas ag and ecosystems is still trying to get into both hitting their priorities and getting those like finalized because the drafts are due, as well as thinking through what that might mean. And so the way that they're really framing this is to say that there are a lot of things that they're not able to speak to. I think Peter put it really, I think Commissioner Walk put it really well in the last Climate Council meeting to say, we're looking at this, and if the question is, did we co-create this with the most impacted communities? We can't say that yet, but we could, as this is going to need to be developed out anyway, because we're not at the level of specificity that could really engage this. So what I will say is, again, that's why I'm trying to think creatively about how to support both getting these things across the finish line, as well as creating some of our own kind of deadlines that make a little bit more sense for us to pull in the people that we're going to need to give us subject matter expertise on some of the other areas that we're not able to speak to. It's kind of like I've been saying, you know, like if we can't say with a yes or no at a minimum, how does this affect seniors in Milton? The answer might be it doesn't really change their lives, or maybe it does more broadly, but we want to just, again, be ready to answer that question. So that's how we'll be able to get this once it hits the legislature, is us starting to think through that and working with others to get those answers for us. I don't know if that helped at all or if that just made it worse.
All right. Thank you very much, Kaya, for joining us and responding and being the guide through all of this process, the guiding hand.
Thank you. So may I just, Catherine, I mean, so I do have this time available though, but I would appreciate an opportunity for us to creatively think about what you want to do with the work that you've done so far, where it will live, where it will be, how people can contribute to it. If there's any creative thinking that we want to build into that, going into 2022, what does that feel like for you all?
Are you asking, Kaya, where, I mean, they have gone through the rubric and the scoring process, as well as, you know, it considered specific equity concerns as in the overall development. Are you asking where will that sit and how can you go back to it when the time allows?
Yeah, so as the communities are going to come forth and say, hey, you did this equity screening, this information, even if it's not complete, right? Where is it? Like, where will it go? What would be helpful for you, or a way for, again, if I'm 350 Sierra Club, Audubon Society, whomever else, and I say, how can I help contribute to you continuing to work on this equity piece? How do I engage with you on that, especially if it will not be in the cap? So asking the group, the folks of this beautiful brain trust we have in this committee, what could that creatively look like? What would that feel like for you? I did see you unmute, Jane, so I didn't know if you had an immediate thought.
Well, I thought it would be important to contextualize also, as people are helping to lift that up with you, Kaya, like that there will be components, both your contributions through your final write-up that will then also inform what the implementation section that Just Transitions is also helping to write about how we further this work. And I think hearing from all of you about what would be supportive for all of you to do this work, one idea being, you know, like supporting an action that is the Climate Council itself, supporting the lifting up of the EJ bill could be one component at a higher structural level, but then there's still the specific need of diving into the details on the paper of how we put forward and design these programs in an equitable way, and how you envision that being supported going forward with the application of the scoring rubric and beyond. And that it's not necessarily your job, it's not your job to write that up, but it's our job to ensure that that makes into the climate action plan to speak to how we're going to further build out equity in these policies. And so I feel like what Kaya's teasing up is any like further implementation thoughts you all have that would help support your policies getting off the ground in the most equitable fashion.
Yeah, Jared?
One of the things I'm reflecting on is kind of the steps beyond this. And in a way, those of us on the council are kind of a third level out. So I think of it as right now, we are identifying pathways, strategies, actions, policies for the legislature to consider and take up, for agencies to consider and take up. The next level will be actual bill drafting and actual rulemaking, depending on whether it's the legislature or whether it is state agencies and departments. And then there's a third level beyond that, which is implementation of those programs and policies. And I think that at this stage, a big part of what we can do is basically say, we think it is very important at each stage of that process to answer these questions, because we could only go so far at this early stage in the process. And there are things, for instance, that I would love to say on a data side that feel premature to say. Maybe they should be in there, but I think, for instance, one of the things on my mind is we should not be implementing programs in the state of Vermont with regard to incentives and rebates if we are not at the same time tracking the data on who is benefiting from those. Right now, so much of the problem we have in trying to assess equity on the back end is we don't know the income or the race or the geography of the demographics of people who are participating in these programs. And I just think that one of the things I'd like to see is that we say that can't happen anymore. Any programs that we recommend for implementation, and that's just one piece, but it's a very specific piece, so that we can not only, we're going to do our best on the front end, but we also on the other side have to be able to take corrective action. And oftentimes we don't know what that's going to be unless we have the data to know who's participating, who's not participating, who's bearing the benefits, who's bearing the costs. So I think a big part of this is baking in that kind of tracking over time. And there are other pieces as well, but I just do think we need to be clear-eyed up front that there are multiple steps along this pathway, and there's only so much we can do to bake in equity at the beginning if we're not also asking legislators, administration officials, and program implementers and policy implementers to do this, to take the baton and do the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Jared. Well said. So we have a number of hands that just went up in response to that. Liz and Bram, and then Christine.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I was thinking similarly, I guess, to Jared as you were talking. Legislature, that's what keeps coming to my mind. Like just knowing, as we all do, and Kaya, as you do, the legislative process and making sure that the voices that come into committee to testify are broader than the voices we've had here, and that as they're setting the policies and implementing some of what we've suggested, that is like literally around the table in those rooms. So yeah, that's what was coming to mind. And also a version of what Jared just said, like how can we, maybe it's your yes and, how can we do both? Because we've also all seen how things get bogged down if, for example, on the data collection, first we have to set up a system and then we have to figure out who's doing it and then we have to actually do it. And like 3 years later, you find like we can't do that. So how do we get things out and going while setting the framework up so that it can truly be more equitable and be accountable in the event that it shows not to be more equitable so that it can then change. Okay.
Thank you.
Bram?
I just want us to be sensitive to the fact that, I agree with Jared that we need to have demographic data to know who these programs are reaching and therefore who they're not reaching. But I do want us to be sensitive to the fact that historically, racial data has been collected in order to exclude Black people in particular. And as we ask for racial data, we need to be sensitive to that.
Thanks, Bram and Christine.
Yeah, this is really helpful conversation. I'm so glad we're having it. And I just want to point out that at least in the buildings and thermal sector, since that's sort of what I'm here representing for purposes of this, weatherization is largely will continue to be delivered in part by Efficiency Vermont. They operate on a performance contract. So the metrics tied to that performance contract, or the QPIs, as they're calling them, qualifying performance indicators, I'm forgetting, wouldn't be that hard to change. That mechanism is in place. And similarly, the clean heat standard is proposed as a performance standard. So we could bake over time, could design the standard in such a way that it's clear that it should, equity is a part of the design of the standard and part of what we're measuring performance against moving forward. So I do think we have some tools in our bucket, either already or moving forward, that would lend themselves well to refinement fairly quickly to accommodate the concerns and interests of this conversation. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing from all of these is that, one, there are some starting points already, but that making sure that I love, Jared, you're handing the baton off to the legislature, so making sure that the expectations for the next phase of this, the expectations to continue the equity screening, are handed off to the people that are going to be in the decision-making process, and that they hear from all the people that, that maybe we haven't had the chance to hear from when it gets down to that level of design and thinking about the specifics. So thanks for asking that, Kaya. I think that was a great conversation. All right, so I noticed we didn't have a break in the agenda. Does everybody want to take a 5-minute break or keep plugging on? How are you guys doing? Break, stop. All right, so let's, can we break for like, I don't know, 10 minutes? Is that enough? Let's break for 10 minutes. And then David, if you could come back and we'll see if we can kind of finish up the rest of your presentation before we move to the review of the sectoral drafts. And thank you again, Kaya, for joining us. All right, so what time is it? I've got, let's be back at 12:50. Sound good? We'll get started then with David. Oops. Great, looks like you're ready, David.
Just one comment real quick. I just started recording again and just want to note that we still want to make sure we reserve some time for comments on the draft and any questions. And I think that's scheduled to start at 1, and we probably don't want to eat too much into that.
And just to note that the non-energy, we don't have anybody from the non-energy task leads here to give you some feedback.
Well, I'm not. Is Colin here? I need to look at the participant list. Yeah. Colin, Colin's here, and Colin really took the lead on drafting that on behalf of Commissioner Walk.
Oh, great.
So
okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So if we can move more quickly.
I will go more quickly. I'm sorry, it's bumped me out a couple times here on the screen share. Let me try one more time.
There you go, you see it.
Okay. Okay, is that sharing the correct view? Okay, yeah, so I will try to move through these a little more quickly. Non-energy modeling for the sectors. So the cap mitigation pathway has emissions reductions of about 32% by 2030 and about half by 2050. 2/3 of the reductions come from the agricultural sector, and about 1/3 of them come from industrial processes. So the emissions by the different segments are on the left there, and then the comparison of the 2020 to 2030 emissions for each of the sectors is on the right. By 2030, the adoption of alternative feed practices to reduce emissions from enteric fermentation are important for agriculture, as are manure management practices. And there is some on the top, the yellow is increased sequestration by agricultural soils. From 2020 to 2030, so the emissions that are above 900,000 metric tons in 2020 down to like 550 something, 558 by 2030, there's an emissions reduction of 350,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So with the social cost of carbon in mind, just on a CO2 equivalent basis, the value of those emissions reductions are more than $40 million by 2030. So increased research on feasibility and some support for the feasibility and adoption of the impacts or the practices associated with the enteric fermentation, the manure management practices, and soil sequestration are all required and will be very well worthwhile. So we've taken kind of an approach here where we're saying the value of those reduced emissions is significant and can support the further research and beginning of the implementation to achieve those emissions reductions. In industrial processes, by 2030, the reduction in emissions from the ozone depleting substitutes are in line with the hydrofluorocarbon rule, which mandates a phase down to the use of HFCs to meet a 40% reduction by 2030. There's also federal action and initiatives to phase down HFC production and consumption over the next 15 years. So the activities, refrigerant management, leak reduction, and use of alternative refrigerants are all the pieces that contribute to the orange line there as the ODS substitutes in the industrial processes going down. There's also on the bottom, the red line on the bottom, a more modest reduction, about 8% by 2030 from semiconductor manufacturing based on a historic trends with that. By 2050, an important element for non-energy is what we've been talking about in the Global Warming Solutions Act's requirements, are gross emissions reductions to 2020 and 2030. In the non-energy sector in particular, and then taking a look at land use change and forestry, which is represented here as yellow, so a sink, sequestration from the Vermont landscape. It's important to consider that and the trends. And so the sequestration from land use change in forests is estimated based on the work that the Cadmus team, along with our partners at UVM, Jillian Galford and her colleagues, did on the carbon budget report, which was deliverable under our task 2 in this scope of work. And that research ends up with a result that has a lower starting level of sequestration based on the carbon budget research. And so this level of sequestration that we see here is lower than what was in the past inventory. And that report details in quite a bit of, there's a good amount of detail on what comprises that and where that stands. The decline in the yellow bar is based on what was in the inventory currently, or past research is just a linear decline based on some historic trends. So what's important here is that if we are looking to 2050, and these are the total emissions from all different sectors, but by 2050, if the sequestration continues to decline apace at a steady level, a linear decline, by 2050, Vermont's net emissions, including the yellow, which is sequestration, as well as the gross emissions above the bar there, will not be net zero. And so what you would need to do is basically maintain sequestration at or above the levels that are represented here by 2035. If you maintain that yellow bar out to 2050, then we would be at a net zero situation. So this is an important finding from the research and the work that was done on the carbon budget report. And it's very important to incorporate in our thinking and looking forward the natural and working lands. How do we maintain a level of sequestration that is at or above what would be represented here by the 2035 level in order to meet the 2050 net zero target? So this, the policy strategies and actions, again, highlighting the new findings, the new research that was done by our team on the carbon budget report. There are the pathway overall includes reductions from enteric fermentation, manure management, and increased soil sequestration, and the ODS substitutes and refrigerant management. All of those are incorporated in the reductions that we see in the plan, and policies and activities to support those. And we gave an estimate of the amount of the value from the agricultural sector. So additional resources to go in to help these happen should be considered and made available. And then potentially targeting some further reductions from semiconductor manufacturing. There are discussions with Global Foundries about their application to be a self-managed utility, and potentially emissions targets that could incorporate semiconductor manufacturing, non-energy emissions, as well as total energy emissions could be considered. And then there is definitely a need for research and actions to maintain sequestration levels at or above that level for 2035 in order to meet net zero by 2050. So
yeah,
okay.
before we, so one question, I guess, is the inclusion of the ag and land use change slides. We are not sponsoring those. So that's the ag and ecosystems responsibility. So I guess the question is, how do we want to handle those in this particular presentation? I don't know, Jane, did you have a plan for that, or do we delete all those slides and defer that to the ag and ecosystems presentation? Can't hear you. Jane, I don't know why you're not muted, but I can't hear you. I think maybe she's Jane. Anybody else hear her?
I'm not hearing her.
Okay. Jane, can't hear you. Can't hear you. She's not looking. I'm sure she's telling us something very important here. Let's see.
Catherine, my quick response would be, I think that they're important to represent at some level here. I think we might want to include kind of a cross-reference to the work from the other group, or make sure that they're also aware. But I think that I think that they should be integrated to some fashion so that it's not just appearing as separate sectors.
So Jane, can we hear you now? Did you want to add something to that?
Were you guys waiting for me this whole time?
Yeah.
I can hear you. Yeah, I can.
We can hear you now. Nope, now we can't. All right, let's go to Jared.
Thanks, Catherine. Just on the previous slides you were just presenting, David, overall, I think these look good. I want to flag an issue of some complexity and nuance to make sure that we have consistent communication on. And that is, as I read, as others in the science and data Subcommittee and others on the council have read the text of the climate action plan, and I'm just comfortable speaking for the Science and Data Subcommittee, and I believe for ANR, which has been very consistent on this, although I'll defer to ANR to speak on their own behalf, that it's clear to us that the net emissions reduction target that's referred to in the law is by 2050. Net zero emissions by 2050 across all sectors is the language in 592(b)(4).
Right.
Whereas the other emissions reduction targets listed in the law are per the existing inventory methodology, which is a gross emissions methodology.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure that when we're talking about targets for 2025, 2030, and 2050 that are in the law, we're referring to those as gross emissions reduction targets, and that what can be done through storage and sequestration as applying to net zero emissions goals is a separate target than the gross emissions reduction targets.
Agreed. And I felt that for 2050 for the non-energy sector, that this then was the appropriate place to bring that up. But yeah, open to Catherine and others' guidance on where we want to address that. But yeah, I agree that that's helpful to make those distinctions, Jared, and that's why I was adding it to this discussion, but not representing that previously.
Okay, my apologies for my technology issues. It sounds like, Jared, you were picking up on the theme. I appreciate that comment and concern of how we represent this. I'm also really curious where and when everybody thinks this is most appropriate, because I actually find this really profound, this comment, this chart here, because I think that maybe the basis of understanding before the carbon budget and before this latter work was that our sequestration rate was not changing as fast as maybe we thought it was, or loss of sequestration. And I find this really compelling around the need to act in stabilizing and enhancing, using the actions and recommendations coming from other subcommittees to do so around the capacity of our natural and working lands to sequester and store carbon. And so if not here, I understand that it's confusing with net emissions and gross emissions, but I also think it's really important to highlight the need to balance the work that we do with respect to climate action because of the loss of our sequestration capacity over time based on the work that was done for the carbon budget. Which is why I wanted David to make sure he highlighted this today, especially.
Is there going to be anybody from Ag and Ecosystems there if questions arise about the particular pathways? Or I guess it's a question about how to manage the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they'll be there as their counselors, but I do think that we'll just maybe we want to make sure that this is available for the following week to make a compelling case around their work, since the emissions reductions component of the agricultural sector, which is up in the body of the cap with all the cross-sector work, isn't actually being presented to the council next week. It'll be presented the following week. So maybe it makes sense to hold.
Okay. Okay, do we want to keep moving to electricity at this stage?
Sure. Okay, with electricity, the main message, or one of the themes that we want to make sure people understand, the graph on the left shows the increase in electric demand by sector. So transportation, the top yellow being the largest, but then also residential and commercial, through the electrification of the space heating and water heating needs. There's a significant increase in electric demand. The chart on the right shows the LEAP model does include in the electric sector an optimization, based on the costs, both the operating and the capital costs for different generation sources. And this shows an increase in the generation sources to meet the needs. And largely the largest element on the top there, the darker green element, is offshore wind, from New England, and then followed the one below that is onshore wind. So significant amounts of wind and solar deployment also are some of the smaller bars represented, but the generation increasing rapidly to meet the demand. The electricity generation mix continues the trends towards renewable, and beyond even the requirements for 75% by 20. The 75% res is incorporated to and continues to expand to meet 100% renewable energy standard by 2050. So one of the things to note, though, is that the generation that's required, the generation to meet demand in all time periods, according to the generation profiles of the wind and solar, this model ends up with, and having them be renewable resources, there's more generation than there is demand from the Vermont electric sector. So there is over-generation, and so that highlights load management, flexible and coordinated loads, and storage as key strategies for the electric sector to consider. By 2025, the increase of electric generation demand over baseline of 796,000 megawatt hours. Electricity is meeting 20% of the final demands. Excuse me. By 2025, this chart shows on the right electricity percent of final energy demand. So we see that it's meeting 20% by 2025, and that increases to more than 55% by 2050. Those are driven by what we've presented earlier, the increase in demand for the electric and the transportation sector. And the electric sector will need to consider the potential need for upgrades to serve close to 80,000 heat pumps and 60,000 heat pump water heaters and more than 40,000 EVs, all by 2025 as well. Equity and access to electrification, electrification for all is important to consider as as in each of these time periods, but equitable access to the resources, both for the electrification and to the electric infrastructure that allows for electrification, is important. And there's continued growth of customer-sited solar. There's about 600 gigawatt hours by 2025. The peak power requirements by 2030, peak power requirements have increased by more than 40% over the baseline. So the mitigation pathway represented by the yellow bar and baseline represented by the green bar on this chart. Offshore wind is providing more than 2,000 gigawatt hours by 2030, and onshore wind by 1,200 gigawatt hours. So significant amounts of wind coming from out of state, primarily out of state resources, but wind. And so there is significant need for thinking about the arrangements, transmission planning, et cetera, to incorporate that level of import of wind into the state. 50% of the electric vehicle charging is managed by 2030, so that there is management of half of the electric vehicles. By 2050, what I mentioned before, the red bar that increases here as time goes on are represented in the model as exports. Those are exports or excess power curtailed generation in order to meet the demand in all time slices. So the model makes sure that there is enough wind and solar capacity to meet demand in every time slice. And then as a result, when the wind blows and the sun is shining, those generate according to their installed capacity. And so we have over generation, and that either leads to curtailed power exports or potentially the opportunity for more strategic electrification of industrial end uses or other end uses that are not already captured in the model. But as we've seen, the majority of transportation and residential and commercial is already electrified, so potentially industrial end uses, more strategic electrification. Also opportunities for coordinated and flexible load management that would reduce that amount of overgeneration by being able to shift the time scale elements so that you can meet the demand in every time period with a lower level of capacity and therefore have a lower level of overgeneration. So for the policies, strategies, and actions in the electricity pathway, the meeting these targets is supported by increasing the renewable energy standard to reach 100% by 2050, investigation and continued deployment of demand response, flexible load management, storage to address curtailment, potentially also time of use rate design and those types of things. There is potential for additional strategic electrification in industry. And there is also then, when we compare the other pathways, I will show the comparative results for one that has a higher focus on local renewables when we get to the cross-cutting results. Let me pause there again.
Okay, Liz and Ed, you have some comments?
Sure, Ed can go first.
Well, actually, your hand is up, so why don't you go first?
Oh, fair
Just-
enough. Okay, he meant he was up. I think it's important. It's similar to what we said in the other sectors, but
Yeah.
I think it's particularly important here to just say what the modeling is and isn't. And that will be important in front of the council presentation as well. So for example, it's meeting the projected demand in the way that the model counts costs most efficiently. And so that explains both the choice of resource that's made based upon current understanding of, those costs in the model, as well as you pointed out the choice of overbuilding generation, for example, because of the time slice needs compared to other choices like putting in storage given the current cost profile of that resource. So there's just like even more so maybe than in other areas where at least we see heat pumps now and they're being deployed and the acceleration curve is going up. When you look at how the electricity demand is modeled here in terms of the resources that will meet it, it feels really important to just say that this is in support of showing that it can be done rather than saying this is how Vermont expects to do it. Because that's not what this is, in my understanding, saying.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you.
Any observations, Liz, while you still have your hand up on what might not be as important to emphasize?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd be happy to chat with David offline. I don't think the balance, the yellow and the orange slide is accessible to a quick viewer, for example. So I would ditch that. I mean, it's the same thing we've talked about before. This one, I get it. And, I know that it's helpful to prove that the modeling has essentially done its job. I wouldn't use it personally for the audience, the more general audience. And yeah, so, same basic comment that we should pick one or two, not the rest, and keep it with the simplicity and parallelism as much in mind as possible. I'd rather see text around how this electricity modeling, the words that I said before, I'd rather see some text, on the slide saying that than additional graphics personally.
Okay, any other comments on the electricity sector slides?
Yeah, if I could just jump in as well on this particular slide, sort of the export, and looking at this, David, my understanding is this includes the total amount of offshore wind, onshore wind, everything being produced, and what is in excess of the load at those particular times. And yes. I think it's important to provide that regional context of if we don't need it, it might not actually get to us in the first place. Right. So in other words, it's not true.
Export is not the correct kind of term. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good general concept that as a region, we're going to need to overproduce during certain hours in order to meet load requirements and all that. And I just think having a little bit of explanation in here about the fact that Vermont is embedded in the regional context and we're part of the regional grid that operates as a regional grid is a really important concept folks need to get.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Lou, you have your hand up.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. Lou Cesari for Velco, member of the Science and Data Subcommittee. I think this is a really great modeling work. I think, yeah, agree with Ed's point that export of power at the regional or the state level are both, valid. What levels of export those are is, without requiring, major upgrades remains to be seen, really. But that's something that we can expect to utilize because we have a connected grid. I'd like to ask about some of the values a few slides back. Actually, if you flip back to the bar chart you had there with the 4 columns, but the load levels, considering I think in 2050, David, and so we have about 1,800 megawatts there in 2030, which is cap mitigation pathway. So that's does that account for 50% of EV charging, or is that before that EV charging control is accounted for?
That is, I think, incorporating the EV charging being managed. So there's a shift of, and it's a very managed EV charging in the model is just, it's kind of a bulk shift to a different time. It's not necessarily it's not harmonized with other loads or things like that. It's just kind of a bulk shift to more of an off-peak time.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I can follow up offline. Be interested to see what those numbers are a little higher than we've seen in the long-range plan for, certainly, our numbers of EVs may differ. I saw in the 2025
right, that's
slide,
with the 2030, this would be representing these, these are where these are all tied together. So this is now with 166,000 electric vehicles and the high numbers of the numbers of the weatherization and heat pumps too that we've been from the earlier sectors.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and I would just note that at that level of load with higher amounts of EV charging management, we're actually able to get away without transmission upgrades. And so I just wanted to note that at the levels you noted for the 2025 slide, it seems we don't expect at this point that transmission upgrades would be needed. I won't comment on the distribution system, but just to add some additional transmission context there. So thank you for this work.
Yep.
Liz, your hand went back up.
Yeah, Lou just reminded me of one other important point on that 50% charging, just as an example. Again, I think it's important when we present it more broadly to say that's the assumption that's been built in. And your point, David, about it being kind of, rough justice load management rather than the more nuanced load management that we actually will be looking to continue and expand. And so again, like we're meeting the peak here and the model is designed to do that. And I don't want to say it would be, it would be success, I guess, if we did all of this because you show the emissions reduction, and we don't expect it to actually go this way because of tools like more individualized load management, perhaps variable higher, EV charging management, for example. So anyway, same point, different set of assumptions that I think need to be to be applied to.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay. All right, we're like 20 minutes past 1.
Okay.
How many slides are under this cross-cutting section?
We have about five more slides left, 6. And this.
Okay. And we have, yeah, if we could quickly just kind of give a very high level picture of these slides, and then if anybody has any questions, and then we can cover those.
I'll do that. So all the pathways, the top line here is the baseline, and the 3, what we've been talking about primarily is the cap mitigation pathway is yellowish on the bottom. And then the local electricity resource pathway is almost identical to that in most areas in terms of these are the emissions reductions, and the biofuels focus pathway is red. All of the pathways, you know, it's not really there's some choice between the pathways and differences between the emissions associated with them, but they all require deep action across all of the sectors. And I think that that's an important message. It's all of these require significant activity and action. It's not as though one of them doesn't have the same levels of deep changes needed. On the economic results, this is now back to the CAP mitigation pathway. What we see on the bottom in red are the avoided costs for fossil fuels. And what we see on the top in terms of investments, both for demand, so this would be increased costs in yellow for heat pumps and for electric vehicles, weatherization, all of the spending that goes on there, and in orange for transformation, so increased investment in the electric sector to meet these needs. What we see is that the net value of those is slightly above. It's about $500 million net value. If you look at those on a discounted value basis to 2019 dollars, it's about $500 million. So for the total cost of the CAP mitigation, meeting the CAP mitigation pathway. The next slide compares the CAP mitigation pathway on the right, and the total net present value is in the green bar down towards the bottom, that 500 million. The biofuels focus pathway and the local electricity resources pathway are more expensive, slightly more expensive. They're 1.7 and 1.6 net costs. And so the total greenhouse gas savings, the cumulative greenhouse gas savings for those comparative pathways are on the white line down at the bottom, 75 million, 79 million for the CAP mitigation and local electricity resources, and the associated cost of avoided greenhouse gas emissions, so between $6 and $22 per ton. Our work on the social cost of carbon under the task 1 and task 3 of work we did earlier this summer with everyone, the social cost of carbon, it being at a recommendation and, you know, through the Science and Data Subcommittee, a value of $122 per ton. So if an externality value of $122 per ton is incorporated into the model, which it's not in this version, then these are all highly cost effective. So they become negative cost. The total net present value for avoiding these levels of emissions would be significantly negative, meaning that there's an overall cost benefit for the state. And the Cadmus team is working also to conduct in-plan model results based on the outputs, these economic outputs from the LEAP modeling, that then we'll look further at the induced direct and indirect spending impacts associated with these economic impacts from the pathway. So this is just the graphic representation of that table. So again, showing the resource savings, the production and the resource savings on the bottom is the brown, and then the components of the increased demand spending and transformation, electric generation and demand spending on the above the line for each of the scenarios. We've done some sensitivities also based on discussions with the Science and Data Subcommittee. There was an interest in making sure that Hydro-Quebec emissions were accounted for. And so based on information that was provided from studies that have been done and the values of CO2 emissions per kWh from Hydro-Quebec resources, we conducted a sensitivity study. And this shows the CAP mitigation pathway emissions versus the the emissions if Hydro-Quebec emissions are accounted not in the CAP mitigation. Hydro is given a 0 emissions. If these levels from the literature are included, the Hydro-Quebec emissions are represented in yellow, and it's a very, very small difference. So cumulative difference of about 250,000 metric tons by 2050. And the cumulative total emissions over that period are from the cap mitigation, I think, are close to 50 million. So it's a very small difference. It does make some difference and increases the emissions somewhat, but not really a noticeable level. Another sensitivity was to report on the impact of biogenic CO2 in the model as well, again, based on science and data subcommittee discussions. The top chart here shows the baseline and cap mitigation scenario pathways. This is the cumulative emissions by 2050. So the baseline is over 120 million, and the cap mitigation has cumulative emissions of around 50 million tons over that time period. So there's a difference of 77 million tons in the top panel between the baseline and the cap mitigation. If biogenic CO2 emissions are counted, then the baseline and the cap, the difference is represented in the bottom chart. And the difference between the two by 2050 is about 74 million metric tons. So in the bottom graph, we see the cap mitigation, including any biogenic CO2 emissions, and then the green bar representing the baseline when biogenic and non-biogenic CO2 is incorporated. So the scale of the reductions is roughly the same, the 77 million on the top and the 74 million to the bottom. And those are, we have some other sensitivities that are still in development. There's, we're looking at a population sensitivity as well. I don't have those results right now, but we'll be incorporating those in our written narrative and report. And that's what we had for today.
Jared, you have a question?
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, a question, and then depending on the response, a comment.
Sure.
David, those net cost and savings figures that you presented earlier, are those inclusive of the social cost of carbon? It did not look to me like they were.
These are not. And so the
Okay.
social cost of carbon and incorporating one that compares it to the baseline and incorporates on the environmental externality line on that chart. So the one above the green line is not incorporated. We will have a version that counts for the social cost of carbon, methane, and nitrous oxide and presents the total net present values. And again, those will be significantly, those will be negative, representing an overall net benefit, including the environmental externality.
And so my suggestion would just be that when this gets presented to a full group, to the full council in the climate action plan, that since the Science and Data Subcommittee has approved the use of a social cost of carbon and has set a discount rate, and as the Climate Council has signed off on that, I think we need to present net costs and savings figures inclusive of that social cost of carbon. I think.
Yep. No, I agree.
View and make it seem like climate action is. Okay. I just want to make sure that in the end, we're incorporating the social cost of carbon, as has been the recommendation of the Science and Data Subcommittee and the Council, and that the net values we see at the end are inclusive of that, not this limited view here.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Jared. I would, this is something that still we're getting the model is big enough now that it needs to be kind of running on SEI's computers, which have a commercial version of what's called a solver to be able to run it, and to incorporate those. We should be getting those results, and I will include those as soon as we have them available to be able to report out on them.
And just to clarify, I think that the sensitivity, I think that the model, the final number, includes a social cost of carbon at a 2% discount rate. The sensitivity is how would that be different at a 1% rate or a 3% rate? I just want to make sure that it's not kind of an afterthought kind of thing to add on, but it's included in the overall number as per the recommendation.
Okay.
Well, thanks, David, for walking us through this so carefully. And I think what I'm hearing is that the task leads, the next step is the task leads need to send to you directly any recommendations they might have on framing, on slides that they think might you don't need, or slides that you absolutely should be highlighting, so that you can get it down to that 30-minute presentation. I'm sure you've got some ideas around that too.
Yeah, no, and the intent here wasn't to, yeah, we knew that this was more, but we wanted to spend the
Right.
time, and we appreciate everybody giving us the feedback. So make sure that we're not missing things that are what the sector leads feel is really important. And yeah, I appreciate the feedback that we got today. I think definitely we can make a kind of consistent flow and condensed version for the Climate Council. So, but we intended to provide you with more than that today.
Thank you very much. So with that, Jared, I'm assuming your hand's down. Yeah, good. Let's turn to the next item on the agenda, which was to, as all of you are coming out of the CAP drafting process, just to share with the rest of the subcommittee any additions that you made to the overall framing of your section. And this is really directed to the task leads, and any changes you might have made in your recommendations that from the last time we spoke about this, when we talked about the prioritization process last week. So those are the two items, and the rest of the subcommittee should be ready to respond to any concerns they have about those changes or any framing that you've added. So anybody, can I ask somebody to volunteer to go first? Yeah, Christine, thank you.
Great, thanks. This has been super helpful. We have not made any major substantive changes to the pathway strategies and actions that we've been talking with you all for quite some time. There is a wording nuance that has come up based on review comments, which I think I should call out today, where one of our pathways is to reduce energy use in buildings by at least 25%. One of the strategies within that to achieve that pathway is the multi-year statewide weatherization initiative. And one of the 5 actions to achieve that strategy used to be, say, through legislation, direct electric and gas utilities to offer on-bill financing tariffs. It's been pointed out that legislation is not needed. And so we've changed the language to say, instead of through legislation, authorize, et cetera, we've said just direct electric and gas utilities to offer on-bill financing tariffs. I've also noticed, and I've been searching for this in our language, the elegant use of the term financial coaching by David Hill today, as opposed to what we had been using, financial counseling. So I've nuanced that change, but that's not a substantive meaning. It's just a better term of art that we didn't happen to have in our heads while we've been writing this material.
Christine, can I interrupt?
Yep.
This is Joey. Sorry to interrupt. I don't know, maybe we should ask the capstone crew, but I think that financial navigators is sort of, because I think that sometimes the word coaching is maybe not a sensitive one.
Okay, all right, so we'll go even further out. Okay, thank you.
Financial navigators, okay.
So I know time is of the essence. I was prepared to talk at a high level about how we framed this, but I don't think you're asking me to do that right now, are you?
Not unless it's significantly different from what you've been saying all along, I guess.
It's not. I just, in the spirit of the conversation today, I think I'll focus on the fact that our recommendations focus on legislative and administrative actions needed early during implementation of the CAP in order to develop a sustained orderly market for energy efficiency and clean energy that result in meeting the greenhouse gas, the WSA requirements, and that the attention was paid to featuring recommendations that are intentionally focused from day one on tackling persistent challenges with energy inequities throughout our state. So we've recognized we're trying to help create a sustained orderly market that will then achieve meeting the requirements, and those who design and deliver programs over time will continue to develop and redevelop and redesign and redeliver their programs within that regulatory and policy framework to meet the GWSA requirements as we see how the marketplace is performing and how investment and activity is moving. So I think that's a way to summarize the context in a few sentences for the
Great.
recommendations we forwarded.
Perfect. And for those of you who've read it, and any questions that to the building, Christine, in terms of how it's drafted, or again, we're not, I appreciate that we don't want to wordsmith anything. We just want to know if there's anything that raised any red flags. Okay. Next up. Joy, you want to go next?
I mean, I can go next. We have not substantively changed anything from what we have shared with you all. I don't know. So I guess, you know, my question to you all is more like, you know, if you could spend some time with it, you know, and if anyone can spend any time with it, like Liz Miller had provided some very helpful feedback that we will incorporate, and I think will help us make sure that the transportation sector is better aligned with the electricity sector. And I think, anyway, so we just welcome that, and we welcome that from anyone. And I don't know if there's anything else more specific that you want to say, Gina, but I think it's has not deviated. On the narrative, yeah, if people have thoughts on that, you know, I think we tried to contextualize why it's important, what a big challenge and yet opportunity at the same time it is in a rural state. And I have something else I want to offer, but I'm going to wait until if Gina has anything to add.
Muted.
You're muted.
Been muted so long, I forgot. I don't think there are any big surprises. Some of the, we're talking to VTrans now, and we're going to be doing some clarifications around some of the VMT strategies and some other things that VTrans is involved with. And yeah, we're tightening up the language in the framing. We think that should be a little tighter and shorter. And other than that, please bring it on. We would really enjoy getting others' perspectives in the draft.
Thank you. Liz, do you want to?
Well, I just want to raise one
I'm
other
sorry,
thing, which
sorry.
is, I mean, it's related to the transportation sector, but it's more sort of writ large. And maybe if it's more of like the, you know, for us, we've continued to raise like some of the things that are like the critical enabling components, like workforce development, training, retraining, recruitment, and retention. So I mean, there's several of those components, and we're going to be working on those, but this stuff doesn't happen unless we have those accompanying enabling implementation strategies. So I don't know when we tackle that as a council or how we tackle it, but I just want to put it out there that it's like for the weatherization sector and everything else. We need the people to do the work, and we need other components as well that we've continued to lift and identify.
Do we need clarification on where those enabling strategies sit in the CAP text right now? Are they in your main text? No,
they are not in our main text.
Okay.
That's why I'm sort of, and we've been talking with Jane, and there's the cross-cutting subcommittee, and I think there's some work to do there, but I don't know if Jane has any update on what that looks like, but I just wanted to put it out there again that like to do what we need to do, we're going to need other components that we may not be honing in on as clearly as we must to actually make this possible.
We are talking about it with the cross-cutting group. It's in a cross-cutting pathways section. In all honesty, I haven't been able to turn my attention back to that component of the work this week. I'm getting increasingly worried about like what we'll be able to get done for December 1st and what like gets picked up after December 1st. We'll be talking about that in one form tomorrow with the steering committee, which is around funding. And thinking about how we frame up funding for this initial plan versus what comes after December 1st. And I think that we will definitely be speaking to workforce in a broad nature, but the specificity of where we take it from there after December 1st, I imagine will still need work.
Thanks.
All right. So Liz, do you want to talk to the electricity drafting, where you are, or anything, any changes you might have made?
Yeah, or Ed could, I mean, so Catherine, just for clarity on your side, we had not shared drafts before yesterday. So it's not so much what changes there have been, but this is the first time folks are actually seeing full drafts. But there were no changes to the recommendations. We tried to be responsive, particularly to the comments raised last week regarding the various factors that would need to go into a res redesign. And I think, the consensus of the subcommittee last week about making sure there was a recommendation to study some specific questions that have been raised, that is in the draft that y'all have now. And I've struggled a little bit in reading the other drafts, thinking through the level of specificity ours has versus some of the others. So any feedback there would be welcome, especially if it's soon enough to actually incorporate. But yeah, I'll stop there. It's otherwise what you've heard us say now in narrative form.
Okay, great. And finally, Colin, can you just say anything in terms of how the framing and the recommendations in the non-energy sector landed?
Sure. I will just chime in very briefly. Our strategies and actions are essentially unchanged from what Peter has presented the last time. Just elaborated on some and certainly added a little bit of context in the framing portion, but it's really the same set, kind of focusing on refrigerant management strategies, making sure wastewater treatment plant flares are operational, and kind of a discussion on emissions reductions in the semiconductor manufacturing realm. So yeah, certainly happy to have any input or questions, or I'm sure Peter will be too when he gets back. And yeah, would love to hear folks' input.
So could I ask Jane for your just reiteration? I know you said this earlier. Right now, there is a window open between now and tomorrow at what time, I guess, is a question, for people to have additional input or take comments from each other and make those final revisions before it goes to the council, right? Can you give any more specification about timing?
Yeah, so we said that we would post the docs by the end of business tomorrow, so by 5 o'clock.
Okay.
So let's work this backwards then, which we haven't done yet. So you all have your drafts up. I know some of you have been responding via email around written comments, which is really helpful, I think. I think that task leads have the responsibility to either incorporate edits and or respond to those specific commenters on why you may not choose to make those edits. And so it's just really, the banter and back and forth between the subcommittees. And let's say, I guess I asked this of all of you, do you want written comments from subcommittee members by the end of today so you can rework your draft tomorrow? Or can you give people till Christine's saying yes? So for at least for buildings, let's say by tonight, any written comments?
No, thank you. If it's my
Go ahead.
deadline, I think I need to be involved with setting it. And I need the comments by 5.
Let me finish. Please don't interrupt me. Just give me 1 second. I want to ask the group for feedback on timeline, and I will certainly incorporate your comments, Christine, and appreciate that everybody should have a say in how the timeline works. I wanted to recognize and appreciate that people are in meetings and working today. So wanted to ask if folks wanted into the evening to provide any written comments, recognizing and appreciating that task leads would have the whole business day tomorrow to make those revisions. And it sounds like Christine doesn't like that. If others feel like they don't need time tonight to do that, then we don't have to do that. We can suggest an earlier time.
So the question is, at what point are you willing, do you want to cut off the time frame in which you are accepting comments and that allows you enough time to respond to it by 5 o'clock tomorrow and have a draft that's ready to post? Christine, do you have what would you prefer?
I'm already booked tomorrow and I thought we were done. And so it would be very helpful if I could have any further comments by 6 a.m. tomorrow morning so I can finish this off with Brian before I have to get on to other things that I'm already booked to do.
Okay,
Is that a helpful response?
Yeah, that's great. Well, I think we should hear from others if others feel like they need time to comment on the building sector. I know you've received some, but not from everybody. Because it might be that if folks aren't intending to do anything else from here, that we could close it sooner.
So anybody that hasn't had a chance then to comment on the building sector that still wants to? You raise your hand. Yeah, Joey.
I mean, I was just going to follow up directly with Christine, and mostly I think the work that the building sector has done is really great. And I'm happy to ask a question now, or I can just follow up and send my very minor thoughts to you, Christine.
Yeah, why don't you do that?
That's when you'll do that, Joe. You'll do that right after this meeting.
Yes.
So Christine, yeah, perfect. So that sounds like that's the last
I
one.
understand that we've got lots going on, so I will follow up momentarily.
Thank you.
Anybody else intending to want to take at least some time today, this evening, to read the other drafts that you haven't had a chance to read and provide input?
I'm going to take this evening based on what Christine said. I'm going to give her my, again, minor, but thoughts on hers. And I welcome people to give Gina and I input as soon as possible so that we too can weave it in. But I would like to time to review this evening.
I would also like time this evening. I think 6 a.m. tomorrow is generous, and I hope it will be well before that. But may not be ready by end of day to have set off everything. So hope that's okay.
Okay, and Liz.
Yeah, any comments would be great to receive. My day's pretty booked tomorrow, so Ed and I will have to do what we can to incorporate if they come then. And I don't know if it's helpful. I did send comments to buildings and transportation already, but and I don't know if Joey or Christine or Gina have feedback, but what I tried to do was not give line edits because, right? I mean, not doing that now. I literally just put like a comment in just a few places, trying to give them a suggestion on a quick phrase or addition or change, because it felt like that was most achievable. So that's the type of level of review, at least that I did, if that's helpful for others as they look at it later today or tonight.
Yeah, and your comments are already incorporated. Thank you.
Sounds like that was much appreciated at that level of review. And in terms of timing, I'm hearing that, we can give people this evening sooner rather than later, and 6 o'clock tomorrow at the latest, in order to provide any additional comments to any of the other subcommittee task leads. Joey, do you have one more thing you want to say? No? Okay.
Well, I'm looking to Liz to help me write that little piece that you had just told me. So I will follow up with you on that.
Okay. So the last item on the agenda is, let me bring this up here and share my screen. I can see what I've got here. Yeah. All right. Let me share my screen now. So this was linked. I have made a few changes to the buildings section that Christine gave me this morning, just to make sure that the wording was aligned with where it stands now. But let me give you some context for why we pulled this together, and Megan helped me do this as well. So this is an idea that came up as they were starting to plan the council meeting for next week. And David Plum, who will be facilitating that meeting, thought it might be wise to try to get some initial feedback from the council via a survey where we ask them essentially 2 questions and use this list as a way, just as a way of summarizing the recommendations that you have in the overall text. The 2 questions would be, do you, have is there anything on this list that raises a concern for you that might stand in the way of you, reaching consensus? Not that they're going to do that at this meeting, but, just let's start to find out what those are, what those sticking points are. If so, the second question is, what specifically concerns you and how would you like to see it addressed? So we're trying to get the council to start thinking about solutions, in positive ways that they would like to see it addressed. So we will frame the survey as framed so that it makes it very clear. We're not voting. We're not, we're not trying to test a consensus at this point. We are just using this as a tool to try to focus on the things during that meeting that are causing heartburn for different council members. And we will hopefully have enough time to do that. So one of the things, as Jane said, was we will send this out Friday. Hopefully we'll get the feedback from this by Monday midday. We'll collate it for you and give it to you so that you have an opportunity to see what it is that they might have questions about. And can do some thinking or preparation for that. So the reason I'm sharing it with you now is because I want to make sure that it is drafted in a way that you feel comfortable captures your ideas. It's shorthand, obviously. We're not capturing all the nuances of your recommendations. It's shorthand in order to be able to get it into a list. If you've all had it and seen it, I didn't change anything from what was posted yesterday except building. So maybe I just need to go down to buildings and just make sure that you're comfortable, Christine, with the changes that I made. This is misspelled. So I did look at your language specifically in the table and tried to make that language more exact. So let me give you a minute just to look at this. And there's the weatherization.
Can you share your screen?
Oh, I thought I was. Sorry. I hit shared screen. Oh, maybe I didn't hit the share. Oh, there you go. Now you should see it. Sorry. I think you're going to find that this is almost identical to the wording in your table you sent me.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. And you mentioned today that what did you say you weren't going to change based on feedback you'd already gotten?
If you could scroll up, please, just a little bit. Where are we?
Authorize on bill financing, right? Got that. What was something? There's one other thing you were going to change.
No, I guess that's fine.
Oh, the counseling, financial navigation services. Want to change that? Yep.
Yeah.
Oops.
Christine, it's Brian. Wasn't we changed authorize to require, right? And did you say that?
On bill financing is what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Forgive me, Catherine.
No problem. That's good.
Thank you.
Others, if you've had a chance to look at this document, I just want to make sure that we have captured it without taking so much liberty and taking a shorthand that it somehow, yes, Joey, doesn't represent.
So if, as I mentioned before, when we talked about joining the TCIP program, again, the reason it's under those 3 buckets is because we wanted to make clear that we hope, you know, that dollars would go to support those 3 buckets of work. That's why it's showing up repetitively. And I want to make sure that our co-chairs sort of outline that for folks. And it would be great to carry forward because it is a 2-pronged recommendation in each of those. Join the TCI program with a complementary policy or policies, I mean, to ensure equity or something.
So
So just
include
carrying
that.
that forward would be great.
You mean including it each place right here?
Yep.
Got it.
And so the vehicle efficiency price adjustment policy, again, we have recommended, you know, this is for new purchases, period. So, I mean, you know, I don't, there's not a lot of huge stats about who purchase new vehicles, but likely not a lot of lower income earners. So there is a sort of a price and a sensitivity analysis that we've walked through that we want to be very thoughtful of. I don't know if it needs to show up here, but if we could have something with like sensitivities for low income and business, you know, low income purchasers and business use, might add that in here. And then
reducing VMT, that's not correctly presented. Oh, shoot, my internet's not working. Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Something about VMT.
Can you hear me? My internet's becoming unstable. Reducing VMT is not correctly characterized here.
Okay.
We're talking about if you look at the tables, we're talking about increasing, well, first of all, doing an investigation around what the benefits of land use change are and the investment, the cost benefit of investing in alternative modes, and then policies that will increase those investments. It's pretty clear in the tables. The directing of federal funds to downtown Village Center is a part of that, but it's not the action that's described.
Okay. So we would not include.
We can rewrite it for you. We can
Perfect.
rewrite that for you. It's just not
That would be great.
what's in the tables.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
so when do you want that by?
This is going to go out tomorrow.
Okay.
I mean, I guess for
So-
me, it generally encapsulates it. I would have just said reduce vehicle miles traveled. Just so people know.
Well,
what
we can put some language in there that's meaningful, and we are hearing back on VTrans on this very issue. And so I think we need to change what's here.
Okay.
And I can work on that after 4:30.
Okay,
Not
thank you.
before. I'm supposed to be somewhere else right now.
That's not a problem. That would be great.
Hey, one last thing. I know we're taking a lot of time.
We will get.
Yes. Anything else, Joey, you see here that?
Well, I mean, the effective administration and coordination of climate programs and policies, that is the bucket, but I don't think it lends itself to like more clarity around what we're actually talking about. And what we're actually talking about is increasing state government and community partner capacity. So we can follow up, but if we want people to be clear about what we're actually talking about.
I chose not to use the pathways. I chose to go straight to the strategies, as you can tell.
No, I understand.
Yeah. Okay.
If you look at the table and the actions on each of the tables, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't have access to the tables.
That's all I was going to suggest, Catherine. I think we could cut all of this by just looking at the new drafts. Just look at the new drafts and do a cut and paste.
Thank you. Yes, I didn't realize that, Catherine. I'm sorry. I thought you'd seen those tables.
So yeah, so I will go back and make sure that they are aligned.
Thank you.
And then I'll resend it. And if there's other additions or corrections you want to make, you can do that. But I'll send it back out to you quickly
Okay.
this afternoon. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Everybody feeling comfortable with this poll, this idea of a poll, the council and council members and trying to get their feedback? And
What was the second question?
second question is, if you have, you know, if you have concerns on any of these topics, what specifically are they?
Yeah. Got it.
And what would you suggest as a solution to address them, or how would you like to see them addressed? I'm not sure exactly what the language is right now, but that's the intent, to get people to come forward with some, you know, positive ideas. Jared?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to go back a second to flag something that
Mhm.
I was surprised wasn't included. And that is the recommendation for the transportation section around following the California emission standard on Clean Cars 2 on light duty electric, or improving the fuel efficiency of the light duty fleet, which is partially related to light duty fleet electrification, but it's also about improved fuel efficiency of the light duty fleet. I just think that since that has consistently been one of the key recommendations, that should show up there.
Thank
So
you,
it's not-
Jared. I forgot to mention that. It's big.
So it's not this, it's more than this. It's not the adopting the California Advanced Clean Car 2 regulations. It's more than that.
No, I think it is that. I just didn't see that before. Did that just get added? Sorry, I may have
No.
missed something.
No, it's maybe because it's down there further in the list. No, that's there.
Sorry.
We can send comments via email.
Okay. All right. Public comment. Want to have give the public an opportunity for one more set of comments. So Annette, you have your hand up.
Yes, my comment is, and I have a question about the document, the Word document, electricity pathways. It has a bullet point list, says questions that warrant further research include. For whom is that list intended? Who's supposed to do the further research?
Let me stop sharing here. That directed to Liz and Ed.
Liz and Ed, yeah.
Yeah, the recommendation for the 100% clean energy is it's directed to the PUC. That can obviously change to any other entities to essentially do a study. But it's essentially, here are some of the questions that need to be addressed in any study. And the specific recommendation was the PUC would conduct that study, likely farming it out to a consultant that they've done in the past for other RPS studies.
So this bullet list is tied to, I guess I'm not seeing the reference to the PUC doing something. It's not clear the way this is laid out, what the bullet list is, what the question, who's supposed to do the question analysis.
Got it. Yeah.
In the bullet point citing, including environmental, community, and transmission system considerations, I was going to suggest adding regulatory, because there are tremendous inequities in the regulatory process. So it's, of course, a little odd if the regulators are the ones being asked to do some sort of review of the regulatory process. But in my view, the regulatory process has not gotten enough attention in any of these subcommittees, and it's a big topic. And so then, Ed, the idea is that on the bullet point, supporting generation of all sizes and types, that this would be directing the PUC to do an analysis of what types and size are appropriate for Vermont.
What type and size of generation resources would be eligible for clean energy or renewable portfolio standard?
Okay.
So that could be developed within Vermont. It could be offshore wind. It could be, that's the question.
Okay. I have had a very recent reminder of how tortured large wind is. There's one standard offer contract was just issued for one 1.5 megawatt wind turbine. It's affecting 5 towns. I'm hearing phrases like kicked in the gut, not sleeping. This is going to go on for 2 years. It is just awful. And it takes a lot of people's time. And so I'm not sure how the PUC would make the decision about what's appropriate or what's not. So I guess I have more questions about this whole section than I think it needs some fleshing out. So that's my comment. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. And Matt Voss.
Hi, all. I just wanted to take a moment of gratitude, and I can just tell that you all are just working really hard towards this deadline, and it's getting just very stressful. So I just wanted to say, keep it up. Thanks for your persistence. And yeah, thanks for each of the things you're doing.
Thank you very much. Very nice note to end on. All right, and with that, I believe we are adjourned for now, and we have a couple of follow-up items in terms of just finalizing the cap and finalizing this list for the poll. And then obviously any input you have for David for his slides for the council meeting. Right, and got it all, Jane?
You got it all. Thanks, Catherine, for stepping in.
Thanks,
All
everybody.
right, thanks all.
Everybody, have a good afternoon.
So long.